Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political editor of the Liverpool Echo, Liam Thorp, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Boateng. Welcome to both of you. First of all, though, let us check out the front pages, starting with the death of Sir Michael Parkinson, which is marked this way in the Yorkshire Post, with a quote from his good friend Dickie Bird: "He was the best." Goodbye to the best. That's how the Metro front page reports the death of the legendary TV talk show host. The Mirror too calls him our greatest. To the Star, he was simply the king. Meanwhile, after today's A-level results, the Eye says they show a generation of young people in poor areas are being left behind. The Guardian says thousands of youngsters have missed out on top grades as results plummeted. The Daily Mail leads with the missing treasures from the British Museum and the sacking of one of its top curators. The Express has an exclusive claiming the Chancellor can now afford to cut income tax because of record revenue coming into the Treasury. The Times says chemists and private clinics are to be allowed to sell COVID booster jabs in future after vaccine manufacturers are involved. So there's the FT reporting that Labour is watering down plans to strengthen workers' rights to gain more support from businesses and counterclaims that the party is their enemy. See the Times shortly, of course. Reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of the papers while you watch us and listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Liam Thorp then, from the Liverpool Echo, and Anita Boateng, former Conservative Special Advisor. Sir Michael Parkinson, it's all about him, isn't it, tonight? Why don't you start, though, Liam, with the Yorkshire Post, and a lovely quote there from Dickie Bird: "There will never be a chat show host like Michael Parkinson. He was the best. There will never be anyone better than him in your lifetime, my lifetime, or anyone else's lifetime." What a glowing tribute.
A glowing tribute from a close friend, both Barnsley boys, and I heard Dickie Bird speaking earlier saying that he only spoke to Michael Parkinson in recent days and was shocked by the sudden manner of his death. But I think that tribute sums up really. He was the best, and he probably, for many reasons, will always remain the best in terms of that kind of host, that kind of interviewer on our screens. I think because the way that media landscape has changed, you probably won't have that kind of person that everybody sits around and watches once a week. 17 million people sitting down to watch Michael Parkinson do his thing, and he was absolutely brilliant at it. He was just absolutely iconic, an institution. I think what I always remember is how he let people talk. Sometimes I think with interviewers, people are always trying to jibe in and perhaps create a bit of a headline, and sometimes as journalists we're kind of taught to do that. But he just made people comfortable. He let people talk. You see that clip with Muhammad Ali when he's on an amazing form, and Parkinson knows that that's the right time to just let this amazing person speak. And at other times he'll challenge, and at other times he'll kind of come back on things. But I think he made people feel extremely comfortable, and that's why he was such a success for such a long time. 50-year career, and there will never be anyone like him.
And it was funny, wasn't it? And he was authentic. And in making people feel comfortable, he showed the best side of himself. That's what people remember with Parky.
Yeah, and I think part of it's also the fact that he really didn't make it about the questions, he made it about the answers, and found ways to make guests not just feel comfortable, but kind of have a stage to sort of show who they were and show a different side to them sometimes. And I think that a lot of the times when we look back at interviews from the, late 90s, early noughties, we're slightly like, oh, gosh, that's the kind of question you wouldn't get these days. But you see these examples now that are coming out, in tribute to Parky, about where he's found those moments to actually allow the guests to kind of push back at some of the narratives about them, whether it's kind of Meg Ryan or Muhammad Ali. And I think there's a reason why guests seem to really have authentically enjoyed being on the programme with him, and also the way he seemed to be behind the camera as well, when engaging with them in private. And I think so much of the rapport that you get through those interviews is established through that sort of his ability and his time that he takes with some of those guests before they get on in front of the huge audience. So I think there really is, no one quite like him.
Yeah, well, there we are. There's the Metro pictured there with some of those great guests, in fact. Is that Emu at the top? I can't tell, anyway. Billy Connolly as well, talking about having to be a comic in the part of Glasgow he came from. Miss Piggy asking him if that was a toupee. So they're really memorable, aren't they? That's the point, I think. And even the Daily Express there will never be another Parky. This warm character that many people would have grown up with, listened to, enjoyed the interviews, put a smile on their face and learnt a lot, about the guest and possibly about him too, Liam, as they were listening.
Yeah, I think so. I think it felt like, he was in your front room with you. And as you say, I grew up, I'm in my 30s, I grew up and he was an ever-present. And for my parents, he was an ever-present as well. He just seemed to be there all the time, a bit like, we feel about David Attenborough as well. And it's hard to do that these days, I think, and to have that kind of longevity. And I'll just go back to my point I made before. I think in our kind of modern media world, it's very hard to have that kind of long-form, considered, really thoughtful interview. Everything's so fast-paced these days and people are moving on very quickly. And I think everyone sat down, gathered around, there was no streaming, there was no pausing TV. Everyone gathered around at the same time to listen to Michael Parkinson do his thing and allow celebrities and the biggest, let's be honest, the biggest stars in the world from all over the world, they wanted to be on his show. And that's because of the rapport he had. And he was, at his heart, I think, a brilliant journalist as well, which, I think is something that we should always remember. He started, obviously, as a journalist before becoming this master interviewer. And I think he learned his craft and he mastered it well.
Yeah, there's some luck along the way in careers like that, aren't there? But the Guardian, which also has it on the front page, points out that he interviewed more than 2,000 celebrities during a long career and picking out the same characters, in fact, Rod Hull and Emu, back again, and Muhammad Ali, which you've mentioned as well. The lead story, though, is about A-levels, Anita. In a sense, didn't they do well? I mean, surprisingly well, above pre-pandemic levels, clearly not as well as during the COVID years. But there are regional disparities. There's different ways of marking across different nations of the UK. So what picture are we left with now?
Well, I think we're left with a picture of, The Guardian obviously doesn't put quite as positive a spin on it because they talk about the fact that A-level results have plummeted. But as you said, Anna, really, that is as a consequence of the fact that you haven't had these adjustments that were made for students that were doing their A-levels during the kind of massive dislocation of the pandemic. That's not to say these students haven't had a rocky time of it. And certainly, I wouldn't envy doing A-levels at a time like this. But we are seeing some good results. You've got the portion of 8-star grades being kind of 8.6%. The combined were higher, the A and A-star and A were combined higher than 2019. So I think there are some really positive signs here. And grading has become tougher again. And I think that ultimately there has to be a point where you start to go back to that tougher grading. And ultimately, the thing that we can see is that employers, everyone's in the same cohort, everyone's sort of in the same sort of boat. So I think that there will be challenges for some of those students coming into universities. We've seen that from the past couple of years, but I think it will even out as the process continues. So going towards a more stringent system seems to make sense to me.
Yes, I mean, does it need to be now has been the question, because they didn't get to do, fully externally marked GCSE. That's been one of the issues, isn't it?
Yeah.
The eye picks up on some of the differences that we've seen. So first of all, you've got marking differences now and grade parameter differences between, the different parts of the UK. But also you've got some really big regional differences which were made worse, which kind of had been anticipated because of different ways of tackling in the hardship areas, COVID, access to online teaching, for example. But there's been a real division, for example, between the North East, the South East and London. That's one of the examples, Liam. But it should be of great concern. And if levelling up was ever needed, it is in this, isn't it?
It's a huge concern, and you won't be surprised to hear me as a northerner say that when you look at these disparities, and we already know the massive gulf that exists in many ways economically between London and the South East and parts of the North and other parts of the country. So to see somewhere like the North East falling behind as London and the South East gets ahead again, we've obviously seen private schools now twice as likely to get top grades as comprehensives and state schools. So you're right to hark back to the COVID era. We saw COVID sort of shone a light on the huge disparities and inequalities that already exist in terms of deprivation, in terms of digital exclusion, which we saw when people had to be taught from home, in terms of the types of jobs that people have. So it's really depressing, to be honest, to see these disparities growing. And I don't think anywhere near enough has been done by the government to try and close these gaps. And for the life chances of young people who I have to say this cohort I feel extremely sorry for. Some of them never sat a formal exam before. And now I appreciate there's a need to try and get back to some kind of the normal grading, but they are just extraordinarily unlucky in terms of the timing of when they've passed through their formal education, because I think many of them will feel that they've been really hard done by today.
Yes, and I suppose the only difference is that if you go now, you can see quite clearly the COVID years, and everything else is different either side of it. Interestingly, Gary Neville, former footballer, obviously, says, actually, I don't believe you should work for 16 years at school and then it all depends on a 2-hour assessment. So people questioning exams full stop or the way exams are. People also questioning university and university courses, how much it costs and whether actually in the future, things should be done differently, Anita.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting strides that actually the government is making in this space around kind of T-levels and all these alternatives that are much more focused on technical skills that a lot of employers are really looking for. And
this will replace some vocational qualifications,
yes,
but there's a high dropout rate at the moment.
Yes, but the idea is that you're bringing some rigour to some of these more vocational qualifications that could be, very, very advantageous in the workplace. And likewise, the government has done quite a lot around apprenticeships as well and normalised those quite a lot more. And so I think those things are all to the good. But the challenge around universities, driving up basically delivery and the experience for students, not just in terms of being able to go to lectures again and not doing it all remotely, but also ensuring that they're delivering things that mean they're much more employable in the workplace. I think that the fact that there's more conversation about that is a real positive, but we can still see through the results today that there are massive inequalities, not just in terms of attainment, but also in terms of what you might call opportunity and outcomes for some of these students. And that's where you need T-levels, A-levels and employers and universities to be working better together to be able to kind of improve a lot for all students as they move through the education system.
Yes, and certainly the Education Secretary suggesting today that universities and colleges are quite adept at filtering through the different grades and marking.
I think so.
But I'm not so sure employers are, quite as nuanced at that. Anyway.
Yes, so it's interesting that Gillian, says, it's not going to matter in 10 years, and everyone started said, oh, she scoffed at them. But I think that's quite true. I don't think anyone's asking what I got in my A-levels for a very long time.
Maybe not say it today, don't say it today when you've worked your socks off. You're petrified at your results. You've got to go and face your parents, haven't got it from school, or whatever. Just don't say it today. Anyway, let's look at the FT, shall we? Labour watering down another pledge is the suggestion here, this time on workers' rights. Liam, talk us through this.
Yeah, just very disappointing, to be honest. There was always going to become this conflict. Labour's had this idea of a new deal for workers that's been kind of in place for quite a while. We know Angela Rayner kind of leads on the future of work for the Labour Party. But there's been this kind of growing tension between, Keir Starmer's Labour wanting to be seen as pro-business, but also having this kind of very pro-worker, pro-workers' rights stance and this set of policies. Things like day one employment rights, ban on 0 hours contracts, and a lot of help for the gig economy, which we know it can be very exploitative. People can really suffer and struggle, particularly during a cost of living crisis when they don't have the same rights as other workers. So what the FT is saying now is, like we've seen, unfortunately, with quite a lot of Labour's stances, including on the other more radical aspect, which was the Green Pledge, they're starting to backtrack a bit now, starting to water things down around those ideas of protections. This, I imagine, will all kind of come to a head at Labour's conference in Liverpool, where, as I can tell you, because I'm there, people will be very, very passionate about protections for workers. We've seen over the past year or so, the strength of feeling that there is from workers on picket lines, in strike action, many of it still ongoing. So it's a massive subject. And I think people are sort of like, the Labour Party, just look at its name, should be there to support working people and not lose out in favour of big business. But obviously, Starmer's Labour are very keen to be seen as pro-business, so that's where the tension is going to come to a head, really. But I find it quite disappointing to see them rowing back on this.
Yeah, just quickly on this then, Anita, pick up on that, but also the Daily Express. It feels like all roads lead to an election in many of these stories. But anyway, the Express says that their analysis shows that Rishi Sunak can afford tax cuts because of soaring wages. We had the wage inflation figures out this week, suggesting an extra £30 billion is going into the coffers of the Treasury this financial year. We know this is an issue for the Tory party, do you get a sense that all of these debates are how the parties pitch themselves for next year?
Well, I think on the tax cuts, actually, I'm sort of intrigued by the fact that you really aren't getting some of those loud, vocal, big beasts from the Conservative Party saying, you know, we really need tax cuts now. Most of them recognise that really the pain that the Conservative Party had to go through to increase some of those thresholds in order to get more money for the NHS, for instance, was absolutely essential, and they have to stay the course, especially to drive down inflation, which is a thing that makes absolutely everybody poorer. But I think actually on business and the big battle around spending, I think this is a very dramatic and quite significant statement from Labour, because this was the one area that basically wasn't going to cost them any money in terms of having to kind of open Treasury coffers, and also was something that proved Keir Starmer's radical credentials. And so to water down things like the single status of worker, basically getting rid of any form of kind of self-employment, gig economy, that was quite a dramatic, you know, statement to the unions. And the fact that that's not going to be present anymore could see some really quite interesting battles within the Labour Party, not just at conference, but for the months to come.
OK, fascinating. Both of you stay there. Lots more to come in the next part of our programme, including this in The Guardian, as the body responsible for investigating miscarriages of justice opens a review into its handling of the Andrew Malkinson case. That and plenty more coming up after this break. See you in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, the political editor of the Liverpool Echo, Liam Thorp, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Boateng. Welcome back to both of you. Anita, should we go to the front page of The Guardian, which picks up on the case of Andrew Malkinson, wrongly convicted of rape, 20 years of ill justice towards him, 17 years of them in jail. And now the body responsible for investigating miscarriages of justice has opened a review into its handling of his case.
Yes, that's exactly it. So it's refused to refer the case to the Court of Appeal, but it's decided to do this sort of independent investigation, a review that looks into decisions, and there's going to be some kind of, opening up of this entire case, and that would be led by a King's Counsel from outside the organisation. So the idea that you're getting some degree of independence coming in, looking at the CCRC's conduct through this entire thing. I should say that Malkinson has asked for the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, to open a sort of broader public inquiry. And that's something that obviously hasn't happened just yet. But I think that there is certainly a lot for the CCRC to explain in its conduct and handling of this case over such a significant period of time.
Yes, and some supporting voices for that idea of a public inquiry. Quite short on time, Liam. Do you mind if I move on to a back page ahead of the World Cup final, obviously on Sunday? And this is the suggestion in the Express that Serena Wiegmann, this great coach, could actually succeed Gareth Southgate as manager of the England men's team.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm completely all for it. I mean, she's hugely successful. She's won the Euros, now into a World Cup final, which I would put England in as the favourites, hopefully not jinxing them there. She's so impressive, so thoughtful, tactically excellent. And why not? You know, it's absolutely brilliant to see the support that the women's game is getting now. And this World Cup has been absolutely extraordinary for that. And well done to Australia and New Zealand for that. And we see, obviously, there's men managing in the women's game, so why not women managing in the England game? And I think she could carry on. And you know, Southgate's been a very thoughtful and impressive leader, not just manager of the England team. And I think Serena Wiegmann is in that sort of same kind of character. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and the question is how people can watch. Can you go to the pub and can you get a drink? Suggestion from the Lib Dems: recall Parliament, change the laws, etc. Pubs. This article in the Metro says. Pub bosses have called for licensing laws to be loosened. Michael Gove, it's our understanding, has written to councils to say do whatever you can to get the pub doors open.
Yes, normally you can't start serving alcohol before 10 a.m. and some before 11 and 12, but there is a lot of support for getting the pub doors open and getting the booze flowing so we can toast the Lionesses on Sunday. So I really Godspeed to all councils in helping to make that happen.
As if they're listening. Anita Boateng and Liam Thorp, lovely to have you both on. Thank you.